Number 10. Hannah Braun. A woman from Pinellas County has been put behind bars after she left a small child home alone and tried to kidnap the child belonging to her neighbor. According to the detectives on the case, Hannah Braun, 28 years old, left the toddler at home at 2 o'clock in the morning, wandered over to her neighbor's house, rang the doorbell, then entered the house on her own and tried to snatch her neighbor's 9-month-old child. What's even crazier is that she tried to steal a child right out from the neighbor's arms after literally breaking into her house. Talk about a bad babysitter. Luckily, the neighbor was able to get away from the lunatic and contact the authorities, who eventually arrived at the scene and arrested Hannah. But even after the arrest, nobody could speak as to the motive behind this bizarre attempted kidnapping. Nobody knows what this woman was thinking or if drugs and alcohol had been involved. Even more disturbing is the fact that police found 2 young children in Hannah Braun's house, with one of the children telling officers that she had lost her mommy and was scared. At first glance, it seems like Hannah Braun was running around kidnapping neighborhood children for an unknown reason. What do you think possessed this person to do that? It just doesn't make sense. Something doesn't add up with this story. What was going on? Number 9. Throwing eggs. A man from Miami named Mitchell Igelko has finally made a plea deal to keep himself out of jail after being accused of harassing his neighbors. Mitchell was slammed with 5 years of probation, but he's lucky he didn't get jail time. Not only did he harass his neighbors in southwest Miami, he killed their lawns, he threw eggs at their houses, and he even firebombed a boat. It all began in 2008, when Mitchell got upset at one of his neighbors who hired a company to do some lawn work. Mitchell was angry because he owned a landscaping company and lived right next door. He could have done the work himself. He must have thought that it was awfully unfair that his neighbor didn't hire him. But you have to admit, after hearing what he did, maybe his neighbors had a reason for not hiring him. It was soon after hiring a competitor that the neighbor's house began to get vandalized. Some of the neighbors then got together and pitched in on a surveillance system. The cameras caught Mitchell doing things like spraying chemicals out of the window of his truck to kill the lawns in the neighborhood. He was also blamed for pouring flammable liquid on his neighbor's car and throwing objects at people's houses. This guy was obviously a menace and probably should have been put behind bars. But instead, Mitchell was arrested on charges of criminal mischief and ordered not to have any contact with his neighbors in the future. Lucky for him. If I were the judge, I'd have put him away for at least a few months just to teach him a lesson. What would you have done if you were that judge? Number 8. Music since 1999. In 2018, a Slovakian woman was arrested after driving her neighbors crazy by blasting opera music from her speakers 16 hours a day since 1999. The woman has not been identified, though it has been confirmed that she would play Giuseppe Verdi's La Traviata on a loop from first thing in the morning until last thing at night to drive her neighbors crazy. She had been doing it for almost 20 years straight. Finally, her neighbors took her to court and she was ordered to stop playing her music loudly. She ignored the ruling, went home, and turned up her stereo. The annoying woman was then arrested and accused with harassment and malicious public disturbance. According to her, she only blasted the music to cover the yipping of her neighbor's loud dog. But here's how you know the woman is crazy. The dog moved out of the neighborhood years ago. She just kept on playing the music anyway, living in her house with the same song blaring for 20 years like a crazy person from a Stephen King novel. Have you ever had a crazy neighbor? What did they do to tick you off? Tell me your wildest neighbor stories in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already, so you can get all the latest amazing videos. Number 7. Minnesota hacker. A hacker in Minnesota has given new life to the term neighbor from hell after unleashing cyber terror on his neighbors that nearly ruined their lives. Barry Ardoff allegedly hacked into his neighbor's network in 2009 and used it to try and frame them for some very disturbing crimes. You can bet it was not great, trying to trap them with heinous and offensive online crimes. The hacker also tried to frame his neighbors for professional misconduct and even used his neighbor's internet to send threatening emails to politicians. Why did the hacker do this? It was apparently to get back at his neighbors after they told local police that the hacker had kissed their 4-year-old toddler on the lips. Clearly, he was deranged, and they reported Barry Ardoff to the police as a potential danger to children. To get revenge, Ardolph released his reign of cyber terror. But it didn't work out very well for Barry, who has since been given an 18-year prison sentence, with prosecutor Timothy Rank saying in a court filing, "Barry Ardolph demonstrated that he is a dangerous man after venting his anger in a calculated campaign of terror against his neighbors." Barry was charged with a whole heap of criminal wrongdoings, and even given a lifetime registration on the sex offender list. Number 6. Funeral break-in. In North Carolina, 2 individuals were charged with breaking and entering after robbing their neighbor's home while the other family was at the funeral for their dead toddler. The toddler had somehow gotten through the front door of the house, wandered into a different neighbor's yard, and then fell face down into their pond and drowned. As if this wasn't mortifying enough for the family, when they went to their own child's funeral, their nasty next-door neighbors took the opportunity to break into their property and steal over $4,000 in goods. The worst part is that nobody knew who did it. It wasn't until investigators learned that 2 neighbors had sold jewelry to a local metal dealer that they were able to make the connection, and from there, they were able to track down the ruthless neighbors and lock them up. Now, of course, the criminals are facing serious prison time for their evil deeds. I mean, really? Who steals from a family at their child's funeral? It really boggles the mind. Number 5. Shooting at the neighbor's kids. Betty Francis was 84 years old when she fired her gun at her neighbors and their children because they were being too noisy. It all started with a dispute. Betty said her neighbor's children's motorcycles were too loud. She didn't like all the noise. She told them to shut up, and they got into an argument. That was when Betty shot a round from her handgun directly at the family and their children, shooting from the lawn right beside them. What a crotchety old lady. No one would have ever expected that she would bring out a gun, right? Only in America. This old woman thought she could win the argument and keep the family quiet by literally shooting at them with a loaded gun. Of course, you can't just shoot at your neighbors for being loud. We do live in a society with rules after all. Betty was arrested and charged with child endangerment and assault with a firearm, according to the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. Nobody was hurt during the incident, and it's not clear whether the children quit making noise after she was gone, but they should watch out. Betty has since been released on bail, and to be quite honest, we should all be fearing for the life of her neighbors. At 84 years old, who knows what a crazy person is capable of? Number 4. Booby traps. A businesswoman who retired to the north of England for a life of peace and tranquility has been recently convicted after turning her new home into a house of horrors through what has been called a rampaging campaign of pure evil and hatred. 57-year-old Jeanne Wilding was caught dumping oil, animal corpses, and even broken glass under her neighbors' driveways, leaving booby traps for them to step in. It all started because of an argument about roots and pruning rights. The argument spiraled into an all-out war between Jeanne and the entire neighborhood, with at least 15 neighbors making 257 official complaints. Throughout the battle, Jeanne was arrested no less than 30 times for attempting to mentally disturb and demoralize her neighbors. During the court proceedings, it came out that Jeanne hated her neighbors so badly that she would make booby traps out of paint tins and flower pots to try to injure her neighbors and their families. And she even installed spotlights and aimed them at their windows. After 3 years of terror, the case finally ended and Jeanne was ordered to pay over $75,000 in damages. I don't understand it personally. Just move away if you can't get along. What would you do if your neighbor started booby-trapping your driveway? Number 3. The middle finger. In Orchard Lake, a man named Alan Markovich erected a giant sculpture of a hand giving the middle finger in his backyard almost 12 feet or 3.8 meters high with a spotlight that illuminates it at night. The giant middle finger is pointed straight at his neighbor's house. He apparently spent $7,000 on the giant hand because he says he's angry at the man who lives next door because he had an affair with Markovich's ex-wife. Not only that, but his wife also lives next door with his neighbor. In a recent interview, Markovich claimed to be over his wife and the man she left him for. But one might argue that the $7,000 middle finger is evidence against that. Plus, why did Markovich even move next door to them in the first place? He said it was a coincidence, but he seems more like a teenager with a bruised ego than anything else. Imagine being his neighbor and having to look out your front window every day in the house you had to pay a fortune for at a giant middle finger. The pettiness is legendary, but also hilarious, don't you think? Number 2, the stolen credit card. Anthony James David took his neighbors to see an NFL game. This seems like a pretty neighborly thing to do, but the Florida man wasn't as generous as he may appear. This is because he treated his neighbors to a Tampa Bay Buccaneers football game using that very same neighbor's credit card to pay for the tickets. And no, the neighbor did not give him permission to do so. Anthony has since been arrested on charges of fraud, according to the Hernando County Sheriff's Department. The arrest came after his 2 neighbors reported that their credit cards had been used fraudulently to purchase all kinds of different goods, from flowers to food to legal services from an attorney, and of course for tickets to an NFL game. But you have to admit, it is kind of funny. Anthony took his neighbors out, treated them to an awesome day, and they found out later by looking at their credit card statement that they paid for the whole thing. Maybe Anthony felt bad about stealing their identity and wanted to give them something back, using their own money. In the end, Anthony charged just shy of $3,000 to their credit card and got busted for the crime. Number 1, a pile of manure. In New Brunswick, Canada, a couple has accused their neighbors of trying to annoy them by building a massive wall of manure along their property line. The giant pile of poo was so stinky that whenever the wind blew towards the couple's house, it would reek. It was also very stinky after a rain. If you're thinking to yourself, well, just how big could this pile of manure be? It was so huge that you could see it from Google Earth. The massive pile of manure just appeared in November of 2013 and was there until at least October of 2014. The couple was so annoyed by their neighbor that they sued them and won in court, getting a settlement of $15,000 after a judge agreed that the neighbor used manure as a tool of harassment. Nobody's really sure how the dispute got started in the rural Canadian town. Both parties had been living side by side for at least 10 years. Somewhere along the way, they stopped being neighborly. One neighbor tried to stink the other neighbor out of the area. They lost $15,000 in the process. The lesson here is that it really doesn't pay to be a bad neighbor. What's the worst thing you've ever done to your neighbor? Tell me about it in the comments. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild videos.